Welcome everybody to today's podcast, and I have the honor of being with Zach Hanson today. And I picked up his book about a month ago, and the title of it is called "Turning Feral: A Modern Journey of Hunting, Trapping, and Living Intentionally in the Wilderness." And I picked it up because I'm one of those midlife, adopters of hunting, fly fishing an awful lot. Been doing that for a number of years, but living in Idaho, we have a lot of other unique opportunities. And I'm like, Turning Feral, the title spoke to my heart. Cracked it open, and I was unbelievably pleasantly surprised, Zach. I tell you what, when I picked it up at my age, just turned over in my 50s here. Like, this is kind of like the calling on, I know, a lot of men's hearts. And you picked it up early because it's about you several years ago, right? But there's this tug to be wild at heart, to listen to your heart and what you're feeling. And your journey in here really kind of nailed it right on the spot. It goes into a lot of technical things as well. Encourage everybody to pick it up. I picked it up on Amazon, and I'll put it in all the show notes. But Zach, thanks for being with me. And I just got a lot of questions, but why don't you tell the audience and share with me a little bit about your long circuitous training? You can pick up the book. That's where you want to get it. But give me the cliff notes of, like, where are you now and where did you start? Because there's a lot of little things in between. I want to get into the nooks and crannies, if you will. So thanks again for being here.
Well, first off, thank you. That's very flattering. I'm getting better at just taking nice feedback and accepting it. And thank you. I put a lot into the book and it's reflected there, and I appreciate the feedback. Now, the 30,000 foot flyover, we mentioned, I'm Zach. I am an adult onset hunter, trapper, outdoorsman, that came through what you said, a pretty circuitous route, which is detailed in the book. But, the long and short of it is I'm a millennial. I'm in my mid to late 30s now. This journey started in my late 20s, right as I was turning 30, where I grew up in the generation, late 80s, early 90s, where, inflation was pretty stable. It was pretty good times generally within our country. And we were preached to that all you need to do to succeed in the world, in the US specifically, is study, go to school meaning a 4-year university, pick a degree, any degree, it doesn't matter. And you're going to come out on the other side all the better for it. That was what was told to me. There was a little bit of trade work being pushed on the back burner, like, let's not do that. Shop had been removed from my high school. I didn't have a shop, like a metal shop, woodworking shop, nothing. And for me, I followed it like a prescription. I'm like, well, this is what I'm supposed to do, so I'm going to go down this path. Worth noting that in all of that, I grew up in the South, and I had been exposed to hunting because it was part of the culture overall. But my direct family were not hunters. My direct family were not trappers. We did not go on vacations to go camp. We went and, went to the beach or something like that. And there's nothing wrong. So I go down this path all the way through to my late 20s, and I realize it's all a sham, is the net of it. I forced my way into a career that I didn't particularly love. I followed the prescription. Took on the debt, got the degrees, got credentialed, found my way into a career, and ultimately found a lot of hollowness, which led me down the path of finding something that could rekindle, what we all probably have in us, which is just this kind of masculine urge, like you said, to explore and to see what else is out there. And that's how I got to where I was. And I know you've got a lot of questions, so maybe we can use those and poke in and dive a little deeper.
Well, what's interesting, as I mentioned earlier at the outset, is that your journey to where you are now was laden with failure. There was, you flew without wire, right? And, missed shots, missed opportunities, spending money on guides and just hanging your head low, but picking yourself back up along the way. And, a lot of podcasts are about the technical things. How'd you get in there? What gear, equipment? And I love all those conversations. We'll get into some of that maybe a little bit later, but I'd like to dig into the, behind the scenes, a little bit more of your mindset and where your head was, because it was a long journey coming from the South, going through a divorce, very prevalent, no matter what generation, and still putting your head down and ending up in the sawtooth to do what you're doing now. Maybe we can just start at that beginning in there. What was your mindset? I mean, having kids, going through divorce, and which is unbelievably traumatic in itself, right? Mm-hmm. But sticking to it, staying on point of where your heart was calling you. What was your posture? What was your mindset going through that? Because that is, as I said, traumatic and
I've given a lot of reflection to that exact question. Actually, recently, it's something that I think a lot of people who read the book come away with asking, like, hey, I'm going through a divorce now. I'm struggling with it. How did you handle it? Or I want to be more in touch with my wild side. How can I go about it? But to answer that question, I have to go back way further because I find in my reflection that I'm very fortunate. I'm fortunate in the way that I was raised. Though it wasn't outdoors, though we didn't have a lot of pressure in our household to be top performers, my dad and my grandfather are the absolute hardest workers I've ever met. They are the hardest workers in the room always. My grandfather is 92 now. And I was FaceTiming with my parents back in South Carolina, and he was out welding. He was out just putting back together a fence that had broken. He's like, I don't need to pay anybody for this. I can do it. So 90 years old with an old mast that didn't have any auto darkening, just out there welding. So I had great examples, and you don't realize it until you have to enact it, that you're picking up on these things of resilience is what I would boil it down to. Grit and resilience and mindset. And then when I got into my 20s, even though I was following the path that was prescribed of go to school, do these things, I think I always had an itch for doing something different. The military for me was always part and parcel and what was driving me. So I did a lot, and I mean a lot, of mental toughness courses just on meditation, how to program your mind to react in a calm, decisive manner in a stressful situation. And it's funny that I put all that effort in thinking I was going to go in the military, ended up being extremely colorblind and, couldn't get the MOS that I was looking for and continuing to go down a different path. But when it came time to cut the cord and run out to the woods, when I realized that's what I wanted to do pre and post divorce, is I was blessed by having practiced and trained my mind to take very serious, very traumatic situations quite calmly. And when I went through my divorce, I had a mantra from the minute that my ex-wife told me that we were no longer going to be a couple, which was a shock to me. I had one mantra, despite tears, despite all the frustration that goes with it and the oscillation of emotion, was kindness. That was one thing. And if we talked to my ex-wife and we're still good friends, I did not badmouth her. I did not say a mean word about her. I wished her nothing but the best. And to be frank, I didn't mean it at the beginning, but eventually I did because I told myself that. And I stuck with that. And that mindset of just being kind and stern and having resilience to put your head down and do the work is what got me through that and has helped me in just learning new things that are tough, which I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah. I mean, was there a period of time that you just had to lay off the passion during that, move off of divorce in just a second, but during that period of time, did you just need to take care of business, say time out, I'm going to get back to this, or were you doing iterations during that period of time to take your mind off the pain and all those types of things?
I would say iterations. It was distraction might not be the right word. I think everybody can inherently know when something's over, or whether that's a job, whether that's a relationship. I think oftentimes, and myself included in the past, that you kind of hang on to something too long. So when this happened, I had that gut feeling this is it. I could sit and whine and cry and fight and do all this stuff, but I felt that my energies were better spent investing it into what was going to be next. So I spared no time in ripping that Band-Aid. Literally, weeks after I was out, I was gone. I removed myself from that toxic situation while continuing to be nice, while continuing to figure it out, but with distance between myself and my ex, and putting myself in a place that I wanted to be, which will happen to be Idaho.
And you tell in the book a little story about how you ended up in Idaho. Maybe you can give some background, and we can go into some of your transition into, the outdoors, and much more preparedness is where it ended up. Sustainability and preparedness started at hunting, passion for, knocking one over in a tree stand with deer when you first got your first taste of hunting, to now it's about sustainability and not survival mode, but sustainability and self-awareness.
Yeah. Like you mentioned, so pre-divorce, I had gotten a taste of hunting. It was a situation based around performance. So I've always been an athlete, wrestler. I still do jiu-jitsu. My ex-wife and I did a lot of jiu-jitsu and CrossFit competitions, the whole nine. And as part of that, I think any athlete listening to this or anybody who's curious about getting into an athletic endeavor, at some point you will start to analyze with probably a bigger microscope than you need the food you're consuming. And we were doing that, right? So we were dialing in, counting our macros, and starting to look at the food we were eating, which was store-bought food, store-bought chicken, store-bought beef, pork, not terrible for you, but as you start to dive down and peel the layers of the onion back, you're like, wow, maybe I could get this beef from a local rancher that I know is, not shot up with antibiotics or whatever the case is. And that naturally leads you down a path of wild game in most cases. And that was for us. And excuse me, I talk about it in the book, but my ex-wife was from Middle Tennessee, one of the whitetail meccas of the U.S. And her father is a hunter. He always had been. It was always right under my nose with access to somebody who was a kind individual, and B, would want me to learn, but never pushed it on me. So I started to dabble in hunting with him on their leases in Tennessee, ended up shooting a deer. And in that time, my ex-wife and I went on a vacation to Idaho. And it's somewhere I'd just seen and wanted to look at because I'd not really explored the U.S. at this point in my life. And I knew what deer hunting was. I was following influencers who were out elk hunting. And we flew into Boise might have been a long weekend, and drove from Boise up to Banks to Loman up 21 to Stanley, stayed in Stanley. It was like May, so there was still a lot of snow on the ground.
Beautiful, though.
Oh, unbelievably. Yeah. And in that drive, just coming from someone who'd only been in the Southeast, I'd seen pictures of these animals that I was like, I'd like to hunt those one day. We saw antelope, we saw elk, we saw mule deer, we saw what ended up being, we saw a wolf, and it blew my mind. Like it literally reset me. Like I just had no idea we had all this access in the United States to these wild spaces within a very short drive from a relatively clean and metropolitan city. And, my opinions changed now that I've been here more, which probably shouldn't. Like now Boise's the big city to me, but that's still me griping after sitting in traffic for 10 minutes versus like an hour and a half in another big city.
Yeah.
But, it was clean. I was like, I like Boise. Boise's great. And the people are nice. So I remember telling her on that vacation, like, we're moving here. And, she worked for the Federal Bureau of Investigation. So she's like, maybe in 20 years. And I was convinced. I'm like, yeah, exactly. So I was convinced just in that one trip that I was meant to be there. And as you read in the book, a few months later, this, traumatic event / opportunity presents itself. And, I wasted no time in snagging it.
No, it's great. I found it very encouraging that you could start at any time as soon as you flip the switch. Being involved in the outdoor. And you talk about hunting and trapping, and which is absolutely fascinating, the world of trapping. I never ever thought about it until I read your book about the intricacies, the stewardness, the responsibilities of the environment as it relates to trapping and the animals and beavers specifically. I'm looking. Are
you going to come out on the beaver line with me this winter?
Oh man, I started reading that. I'm like, wow, that would be something else. I ran into a really large beaver dam out at Lost Creek, out in Stanley on the backside there, all bundled up and back there. My wife and I were back there doing some camping and so forth. I'm like, look at that damn, what is that all about? And a week later, I read your book about, like, man, it's very, very, very passionate, very exciting. Beaver, and then also you talk about wolves, hunting and trapping. It's just fascinating. But, when you started out and you moved into hunting, what was your reception when you hit the ground in Idaho?
Cautious acceptance, I think, would be the right way to put it. And I think, well, first and foremost, I landed in the smallest town in Idaho, 38 year-round residents. So, some Yahoo from Louisiana at the time who didn't know his, butt from his elbow about living in a relatively off-grid community, very green as it related to like true backcountry hunting and trapping. It was like, okay, who is this guy? What are his motivations? And in the book, I chronicle it a little bit. It comes full circle into like that acceptance, but it was cautious, right? I think people in Idaho, especially people who've been in a town as small as where I'm at for as long as they've been, like, there's a vetting process to everything. Right or wrong, the hunting and trapping industry, I would say, has a bit of a problem with eating their own, right? Like, it no matter how you look at it, what we're going after is a limited resource, even if it's not by, definition, by the number of tags sold, and there's everything that goes into making sure that carrying numbers go the same way. But when you bring more people in, inevitably the spot you used to hunt might have somebody else in there, especially when you're on public land and not private land, which is most of Idaho. And that can become with its own negative connotation. Same with trapping. Like, there's only so many beaver to trap. So, if you find that spot out where you're at, there might be 2 other trappers who are trying to get on it. And you want to, A, respect your neighbor, B, make sure you're not trapping out a population, to the wrong degree. And it becomes complicated, but it very cautious as far as reception of, my intentions and my abilities at the time, to be frank.
Gosh, that's very similar to my experience. You went all in, cut, burnt your bridges, and got on a plane and went, if you will. Yeah. Mine was, I could do what I do anywhere, and I was fortunate enough to meet and live next to some really great and gracious friends who are natives, and the same sit and wait, see what this is all about. But I kind of took the posture of being the outsider, is that I think I need to prove my weight. I can carry my weight up the mountain, and I'm willing to carry it back down, and also wait for my time. They've been hunting, a couple of the different units we've been at for over 15 years. And I'm going to take the first shot? No. I'm sitting in third shot, is what I call them. Mm-hmm. Sitting in third shot, and I'm just going to go and pay my dues. Only 1 in 10 to our listening audience, 1 in 10 are able to, really bring in maybe a nice sized bull. There are always exceptions to that, which we see on the social media channels and so forth. And then people like Zach are out there all the time. But I might never pull down one, a nice bull. But it's the process and the experience, and you have to pay your dues. And that's where I've been the last 4 years. It's just paying the dues in September and, of course, in October. So there is a lot to be said there. And then everybody warms up to you along the way. But you just a suck fest before then.
Well, I mean, it's a suck fest the whole time.
I think that's the physical hunt is, but also, getting people, because you want to be friends with people. You want to go out and do things with people that you like and trust.
But you are also speaking from the same place that I was speaking, which is a place of humility. And I don't know if that's a generational thing. I think where some of elbows get rubbed in an abrasive way are when you have somebody, like if you and I were to go and be like, okay, like I am in first shot, like, I'm out here too. I'm paying for my tags too. Like, you don't own this land. Like, if you had this attitude of selfishness, then you would probably karmically receive that back, right? And so I think most humans, I love to believe that, and though it hasn't been evidenced in real life, have that stance. Like, most of the people that I meet in the hunting community are that person exactly. Like, if they come hunt with me, they're, I want to learn from you. I want to, I'm not here to take an opportunity. You're not a guide. I'm not a guide. They have that mentality. Like, I'm here to learn. And it's like any apprenticeship and anything else. Like, you come up and if you don't have someone to follow, you're going to be out there on your own, and that's fine too. That's some of what I went through. But when you have that opportunity and you can be eating that humble pie every day and have that humility, like it will pay off tenfold down the line. And I think, and I hope for everybody that, especially in the category that you and I have found ourselves in, being like an adult onset, late to the game, like take that tack. That's the route to get on for success at our age and beyond, is find people willing to teach you and be humble and, you know, run down that path with them and help wherever you can, and your opportunity will come.
Yeah, I think there's so much truth to what you're speaking there, and it resounds with me. I found it interesting in your book that you actually hired a guide one year, and I was thinking, I work in marketing business and marketing at executive level. I'm like, well, let's go buy the expertise, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not a guarantee. What was your experience, your first time?
Well, you're right in saying like buy the experience. So I did it. You know, I come from, you know, the business world, so to speak, too. So like there is an element of like, mentally, how can you beat down the learning curve of anything? And some of that is buying experience. Like if you wanted to become an expert in artificial intelligence, you would go and you would take a course. That's where you would start. And so I viewed a guide as a hands-on course. And it really was. What I've known, like I've become close friends with a lot of guides, the guys that I went with, and just the community I built up around me. Many people are guides. And what is shocking to me, because my mentality going into that guided hunt is I understood, like you talked about, the opportunity to pull in a big bull, whether it's DIY or otherwise, in most units is like less than 10% if we're talking about archery hunting. Paying a guide doesn't raise that anymore. It just might take you from, 4% closer to like 9% because they have knowledge of the terrain, knowledge of calling, knowledge of the animals. But when talking to guides, they deal with so many people who come in and have an expectation like, oh, you're just going to get me on a bull and I'm going to shoot a bull. That blows my mind. Right. Like, and dealing with clients who are livid when it doesn't work out, even if they get an opportunity and they miss, they're like, well, where's my next one? So that's a long precursor to answer your question, where I didn't harvest a bull when I went with a guide. I had an opportunity. I whiffed it twice. On top of that. And, but I learned so much. Like I went with a learner's mindset, and I still friends with the guy, but I'm sure I annoyed the crap out of him. Like we'd be walking through and he'd be moving a branch one way. I'm like, why'd you move the branch that way? He's like, because it's in my way. There's absolutely no correlation to the rest of the hunt, but I appreciate the question. But just learning things like wallows, how their movements are at different times of the day, and not having a mentor or a family member that took me along that way. I do think there's a lot of value in that if you have the right mindset, again, of humble, go in. It doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a bull. It will up your chances in that window, I believe, personally. But yeah, I failed, right? I did it to beat down the learning curve. It did that for me. It succeeded in that regard. But from the success of harvesting an animal, no. It's still all user error. I got on bulls, but couldn't make it happen.
Another analogy I refer to is I play golf, when I get an opportunity. And my friend that I go play golf with, he says, you need to upgrade your sticks. I said, it's not my sticks. It's definitely human. Would I maybe be able to do a little bit something to the left or the right? Sure. But my 10-year-old sticks are just fine. It's my swingy, and it's how I am. And the same thing when you go up with a guide. You got to be able to be willing to pack it down. Unless you bought, really fancy pants, they're, deep country with the mule and packing it down. But you still got to do it, take advantage of it. There's a physical element to it. It's just not the rainbows and unicorns when you get up there.
Yeah, and, a lot of guides will take that weight off of you if you want. I mean, that's not my personal bet. Like if I do that, I want to feel everything. And I think that's part of the learning curve. And I think there are more and more people who are even going with guys who are starting to go in with that mentality. And I think they love that. If you talk to any guy, the number one thing is people can't shoot when they show up or they're not in shape. They can cover the not in shape to a certain degree between horses, ATVs, and taking care of the butchering and packing out process. But, shooting and the being prepared part, that's all in the individual. So like if you're going to invest money you should take the time and effort leading up to it to make sure you're as well prepared as possible. And I believe the physical side too, but it's not for everybody.
No, I think I was listening to Cliff Gray a couple weeks ago, and it's like the top 3 reasons you're not ready to go elk hunting. He's health and mind, physically fit and get up there, and then the 2 you want to suck it up as well. So jiu-jitsu, you roll. You have, and so now you're 20 years into it, still rolling.
Just a skosh under 20 years.
What would you say to any newbies, older newbies, breaking 50 here, getting into jiu-jitsu, something that's worthy at this point? What would you suggest?
And I'm sure you have, and most guys, like I have a close friend who lives up in Atlanta part-time. We've built a business together. I think he's 52 now, but he just started jiu-jitsu. If you've listened to Jocko, if you listen to anybody who's been in the jiu-jitsu game for a long time, like there is that whole personification of jiu-jitsu, mimics life. Cheesy as it is to say, it really is. Like there is an element of jiu-jitsu that is hard. It's hard every day. Like I went today at noon and it was just hard and it sucked. But there are moments of glory every single day of micro wins of, a position you've been working on or fixing something that you've been working on, for me in often cases 15 years. And it's beautiful. And, from an advice perspective at 50, my jiu-jitsu game has changed. I'm in my my mid 30s now. And even from my 20s to my 30s, like the way that I train is completely different. Like there are people who I just will not go with. And you'll figure that out as you get into it. Like, certain white belts or blue belts, like on a Tuesday at noon, it's not worth me getting like heated and trying to go like Hulk mode. And then I sprain my neck. So it's like wake up the next morning and I can't get out of bed. Like it's not worth that anymore. So figuring out, and it's harder if you haven't trained before in jiu-jitsu to figure out what that threshold is. So, that's something I would go into it with the mentality of like, let me figure out what works for me, but figuring out what your training should be like and understanding what you want to get out of it. Do you want to be Bob, the competitive Masters Division jiu-jitsu guy? Or do you want to be Bob, the guy who has enough confidence to defend himself in a physical altercation and keep in shape?
Yeah.
And those are big differences in the way you're going to train. So figuring out what that is for you is very vital.
Sounds like some of the key elements and the principles are very translatable to getting in the field and getting up a mountain. Something you've been working on for so long, your calls, reading the wind and the drift and the heat and the time of the day and wallows and et cetera, you're trying to figure it out.
And I would say on top of that, it's something that translates, but you can do almost daily or weekly, right? Our window to elk hunt is quite small. So you might be thinking about reading the wind, or maybe you're out on another hunt at a different time of year practicing, but that rut window when you're out in the woods with a bow and arrow, you got a couple weeks, 2-3 weeks, and you might not only have that much time if you're a working stiff like us, like you might have 5 days. So jiu-jitsu is something where you can do that same kind of thing year round, build that muscle of test and learn. And obviously that could translate to elk hunting, trapping, anything else in your life. But you build that consistency, right? That's what I think is different and beneficial.
It's interesting you bring up something you can do every day. I've used just the last 4 years, the month of September as the goal for my physical fitness. And it still is waning at my age. It gets harder to burn it and put it on, muscle wise. But it's that September 1 or August 31st, September 1, that is the constant driver. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you doing in June? Well, what are you doing in July? And what are you doing in August? There's a constant rehashing of like, this is the goal, why you're doing what you're doing right now in sweltering 100-degree weather. To get in
still
shape,
got to be out there
constant. Let's look just in the other. Yeah, being out there along the way, and I find it also is interesting, and maybe you can provide some comments about this, is that in our modern day right now, and specifically as you get older and wiser in your career and you're experiencing this, you have more means, financial means. So we're on social, you're on YouTube, you're checking out the latest and the greatest gear, and you can buy all the great stuff and be set, yet still not climb one mountain.
Yep.
You want to add any comment to that? What was your experience going into that? Or you had, you bought the best of everything and then took up to the mountain and figured out it's a lot more than that?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, like I said, I was fortunate when I got into hunting and trapping, I could afford some of the better equipment. And, some people dog that. And, some people also say it's all marketing, which of course it is. You're a marketing executive, but it works, right? Like if somebody comes into a new sport, you're going to gravitate. Like, I don't care who you are, unless you have an uncle or a buddy who's like, you should be getting QU instead of Sitka, or, now you should be getting Origin camo over anything else. Like, shut up. Like you're going to follow the people who have the most prominence in gravity, which happens in most cases to be influencers. If you go buy Walmart camo, can you still kill an elk? 100%. If you go buy a full line of Sitka camo, can you go kill an elk? 100%. It doesn't make you a hunter to buy that gear. I found that out, right? I had all the high speed gear and, I still had to get handheld, right? By guides and then just trudging through and coming up skunked and eating tag soup multiple times. But I eventually got there. Now I'm filling more tags more consistently than I did at the beginning. But as long as you go in knowing that the gear doesn't make the man or the woman, why not get what is perceived to be the best thing to give you that edge, right? That's my perspective. And sure, like my Sitka's kept me nice and warm and dry on multiple occasions where something else might not have. So I'm not complaining there. It's been good quality so far. Would I do it again with the knowledge that I have now? Probably not. But I was going on limited knowledge.
Right. It's about that remaining 5% beyond your hunting skill and your knowledge, that 5% that makes a difference when you watch like a Cam Hanes and everybody else is out there. And now yourself, you're pulling down an awful lot of tags on your own. But so you went to one end of the pendulum, right? Mm-hmm. All in. And then you've kind of swung back. You swung back to the middle, and you're really involved in AI and machine learning, which has swept over the country for the last couple of years, especially in my space. How have you transitioned back? Was it just a matter of temperance? Was it a matter of need? Was it a matter of, proximity and just the modern times? Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yes, I will. Couple of different things. So like when I went out in the middle of nowhere, I was all in, cabin, focused nothing but hunting, trapping, beating down that learning curve. Met my wife, which was awesome. She's a backcountry gal. We were out in the woods together having a blast, and we started having kids in our 30s, right? This was not something that I had planned on previously, and it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me, but it was a collection of now having kids, realizing after our third came that, we do need to be back and forth after a life flight helicopter ride, that, a 4-hour drive down an 80-mile dirt road that is often landslid or rock slid in doesn't always lend itself to raising a family. Now, hats off to people who can go all in on that, like call it risk aversion, whatever it is that exists in my soul, especially now that I look into my little kid's eyes. Like I want to be able to find what the right balance is. And frankly, like we don't know what it is. It could be a situation where we're all up at the cabin soon, and that's the life that we decide to stick with. It could be something else where find a place with a little bit more acreage where we can kind of homestead a little more. We're pretty positive it's not the house that we ended up getting in Boise, in Garden City, where we split our time now. But all that said, having 2 mortgages, trying to support 2 different kind of lifestyles, it lends itself to needing more than just what fur trapping can provide. But with that said, I went back into industry. I found the balance. I've been very lucky in my employers to find jobs that let me work pretty much East Coast or European hours, where I can be up and have my first call at 6 a.m. and I'm done by 2 p.m. That means anything before 6 a.m., like if I want to go run trap lines, or after 2 p.m., I'm with the kids and we can do stuff outside. So it's worked out great. But I had a real epiphany last year. So last May, I was the head of machine learning for a publicly traded company out of Boston. And first time in my life where I had a job that was very secure, I got laid off. We had just bought the second home, had the mortgages, talked about still being prescriptive of what we were told to have, which was like, make sure you have 6 months of savings built up so you can float yourself. We checked all the boxes. We were safe. We were good to go. And 6 months went by, no job. The market was just dead. Then, we hit the bottom of our savings barrel, and then we started, fighting. And what turned out to be 11 months of unemployment for me, which was, took us all the way almost to zero, almost to where we had to have the hard discussions, like, do we sell the cabin? Do we sell the Boise house? Thank God that, the prayer and everything we did, something came at the right time, but, we had to sell some assets. We had to do, I know people are probably boo-hoo, but it was hard, with the kids and trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And thank God I had a skill. So I was working at a taxidermist locally, and I was trapping. And trapping actually paid our mortgages for at least 2 months out of the year, because I was having to trap hard, and I was getting contracts to do some trapping. Now, the hourly rate, when you look at that compared to the time put in, peanuts, but we made it work. And, I am now back working full time again in a great situation where I can work like 6 to 2 for most days. It's intellectually stimulating and it works for our lifestyle right now. But I have this ingrained fear. Like now, this new fear is unlocked of it being gone at any point. And you look at our markets and it's going that way. So one thing that I am doing, and actually the next book I'm writing, is about the trade gap and kind of hyper analyzing what we were raised on in my generation of like trade's bad, school good, and the deficit of tradesmen that we have. So I'm actually in night school over near you at CWI learning stick welding to get my structural welding cert, just so I can have a actual skill to fall back on, because AI, nothing's promised, right? And it was just so demonized for my generation, and in the history you kind of see why, and I don't fault my parents or their generation for it, but it didn't set a lot of us up for success. And you saw with COVID, if you don't have skills, and even at the cabin, I break a trailer, I'm having to ask somebody else to weld it. I don't want to be that guy. If something breaks in my electrical, I want to have basic knowledge to fix things, and my generation can't fix shit, frankly.
Yeah. Wow, that's inspirational, Zach. I mean, seriously, that's really something. As you watch the news every night, you see what's happening. Skynet is real. It's alive. Right. And at the end of the day, nobody's coming for you. Whether it's feeding your family, protecting your family, fixing your car if you need to get the heck out of Dodge, or Atlanta or Nampa or wherever you live.
Anecdotally, it's interesting because I've talked to a lot of friends. So the age stratification of the individuals that are in this welding class with me, night welding class, 50% are probably exactly who you would think, 18, 19-year-olds coming out of high school who are like, I actually want to go into the trades, want to learn TIG welding. The rest cover a wide range, male, female. There's a couple car enthusiasts who, ironically, just wanted to put new floor panels in their cars. And they got quotes, and this just shows how big the trade deficit is. They got quotes to do this, and it was $30,000. And they're like, wow, it's way cheaper for me to go learn to weld myself, buy a welder for $1,000, do it, and then I know a skill that I can perpetuate. Other people are kind of on the hobbyist level like me, like I want to be able to modify traps on my own and have a skill to fall back on. And, others who are just like, I just need another way of income. And they're saying for every 5 welders, plumbers, electricians that are retiring right now, only 2 are filling the role. So there's just a bevy of jobs that are available. But, if we want to survive as a country too, like my argument is that every American, like even if you stick in your marketing job, even if I stick in my AI job, like every American needs a skill, because at some point, especially in a bartering community, your skills are going to become valued. And frankly, for me, if I like reflect on myself in my like software career, I don't build anything. I have no tangible thing I can touch at all in my whole career, 12 years and in software. And that scared the crap out of me.
Gosh, there's so many unique parallels to what you're talking about. Fish hunting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hunting skill. Pass it on to your kids. They have something very tangible to put something on their table. If when it comes to that, foreseen time. And same thing with all the other trades. Powerful. When do you plan on having it done? How far along are you? Still in concept outline, or what's your plan?
We're writing. I'm writing. It'll be probably a year, honestly, from time of writing. But it's interesting. Like even a close friend of mine was doing an ADU in his house, and he got a quote for running the electrical for the ADU, and it was $50,000. And he had some experience, and he's like, "Well, I'm just going to do it." He got all the permits and did it all, and
run a jacuzzi line. Run power for a jacuzzi.
Yeah, exactly.
What? How much?
Yeah, it's insane. But to your point, like even the hunting are skills, and I think the scary part, and I want to believe socially the gap is closing, but it's hard to see evidence like through all the clutter of social media, news media, whatever media we are primed to consume, is that we are not as far removed from 1880 as we think. Like the ability to, the base skills of human survival, like how to get food, how to butcher food, how to cook food, how to preserve food. That's like staple, right? Like without that, you die. How to get water, how to purify water. Without that, you die. Then there's all the other things of like, okay, we're now in a new world order. Like, how do we keep the lights on? You need to understand basics of electricity. You need to understand how to put something back together, whether that's welding, soldering, woodwork, whatever. Less than 100 years ago, everybody had or was exposed to those skills and even taught them in schools, and we've removed it all. Mm-hmm. And it puts so many of us in a helpless situation where, your water heater breaks, you got to call someone, and right now there's often like 2-week waits.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. Well, it's interesting is that the timing is really unique for your book. I mean, you have others echoing out there, shouting out in the woods. You got the Mike Rowe, who's been very active in that space about the trade stuff forth. But I think the timing of your book and what's happening out there could really hit the mark, if you will. And buy your first book.
Well, appreciate it.
I'll give you and sign it.
I'll do you one better. I'll give you the pre-read, and you can tell me everything wrong with it.
Oh, there we go. I appreciate that. So, spent a little bit of time here and just a high level overview of the book about your life, and really not into the technical elements of hunting because everybody's going to have to do it in one way. But I know that a lot of people that follow the channel are into gear. What would you say your first 3 pieces of gear, the most important 3 pieces of gear in archery hunting is for you? Now that you've gone through this process, what are the first 3 things to spend the money on if you're going to spend the money?
I found in archery elk hunting, especially if you're doing it in the rut, rangefinder. Rarely ever take my binos out. Like, yeah, if I'm glassing up a hillside, but like when you're in it, like 98% of the time I'm using my rangefinder for everything. So getting good rangefinder glass.
What are you running?
I have one of the new SIG. I'm not going to remember the specific. I can put it in. You can put it in the show notes. But it's a SIG, and I enjoy it, and it's stabilizing and all that good jazz. That's one. The other, I would say, for me, is a life-size target. I think that repetition, or a mini life-size that you can coordinate at a distance, but just getting shot placement and practicing at different angles, quartering towards you, quartering away, understanding all of that is very vital.
3D.
Yep, 3D. So that's 2. The other fitness. I know it's not a piece of gear, but I would invest I'm good friends with the Mountain Tough fitness guys, like a tailored program for what you want to do is vital. I did not necessarily do that my first go round, but afterwards I realized why the lunging, the rucking, all the things that go into a good elk hunting tailored fitness program are vital. So those three things combined can take you probably a pretty long way, I think.
Yeah, gosh, that's really good advice. I just literally this year picked up the Mountain Tough app, and man, it'll grind you. But they've got a lot of variable programs in there that kind of fit in your day, which is great if you're, executive, got a 9 to 5, you can fit it in garage and all that kind of stuff. So
well, you can do the MGD. You got 30, 40 minutes. There's no excuse. Zero. And the minimal gear too, if you want it, like where you don't need to have a full gym or bumper plates and a barbell. Like that's what my wife does. She gets it in every day, reluctantly some days, but it doesn't take much, even with 3 kids running around.
Pays your dues. Well, that's great. I appreciate those tips. And finally, we asked 2 questions also. It's like, what would you tell your younger self? You're 20 something now, where you are, you're pressing 40. So average life expectancy is 78, right? So
I'm on the back end, you're saying.
So you're at halftime. Surprise, buddy, right? So halftime, you're on the front end of, moving into this transition phase of your life, whether we like it or not. I'm squarely there. But what would you say to your younger self now, having gone through all this stuff? Good advice.
Man, I want to give a thoughtful answer. I mean, nobody's asked me that. So the advice I'd give to my younger self, pray more, frankly, is this might be a different tangent or soapbox, but I spent my late teens, all of my 20s, most of it overseas. I was searching for something. I grew up in a Christian household. I had a VBS level understanding of the Bible, for those who know it, and I thought that was good enough. I spent more time exploring other religions, seeing where the answers were, and it was always right there with me. Obviously, going through my divorce, me and my wife, who's a great Christian, who kind of got me back on track. Like a lot of what I've been blessed with has come through, whether I knew it or not, prayer. But now learning how to be more thoughtful in my prayer. I wish I would have had that hindsight and that clarity when I was younger. I was too stubborn and too egotistic to give the glory to somebody who's bigger than me and, provides it all. So that's my stance on what I would have taught myself or wish I could tell myself back when I was in my 20s.
That's so outstanding. So outstanding.
It's really weird for me to say that. Like I've told my wife like that.
Why?
I've been a Christian.
Yeah.
I have never been an outspoken Christian, which is probably a counterintuitive thing. And it's still like, I have been reading a book called Knowing God, which is great, which has helped me understand. Like I've run into a lot of proselytizers in my life, and they've always rubbed me the wrong way in a lot of instances from like a holier than thou standpoint. Again, ego clashing. And for me to profess things out loud, it has been difficult. It's been something that's been surprisingly hard for me to do, but I'm here and trying because it does mean a lot to me, and it has impacted me recently more than anything else in my life.
That's outstanding. It's also the testimony of your walk and your life and your journey, because you got to this point now. It's time that you've been moved to a place that it's time to stand up and say something.
And and I'm reading the Bible every day. Like, I'm going back to, like, my brother-in-law is a seminary student. So he was a theologian. He's a preacher.
That's awesome.
And VBS wise, like, I thought I knew the Bible, and I'm reading it, and I'm in Ezra right now. And just to say, the Old Testament is messed up, man. Like all the little stories that I was taught that ended all flowery. No, most of them ended in death, murder, or something terrible that
50,000 people wiped out. God said, kill 35,000 people. It's like the whole process of the story of us.
Yeah.
That's what the Bible is. It's the story of us.
And as an adult doing that with the ability to study and a discerning eye has been phenomenal. Scary, but phenomenal.
Yeah. Well, that's outstanding. Thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And the last question is, what do you hope people will say to you at the end of your days when you're gone?
Oh man, he died learning. You know, you see my little handle on Instagram, Let Me Die Learning. Like, I want to be just like my granddad. You know, he's, credit him a lot. He always told me, I'll always buy you a book for something you want to learn. If you want to learn something, this is like pre-chat GPT, of course. But he's like, if you want to learn anything, it's in a book. That's my one promise to you. Any book you want, I'll buy it for you. And I took advantage of that in my teens and early 20s. But he's still out there, you know, trying to learn to strike arcs and stuff on welding. He's still, you know, Googling things and being open-minded. And that's what I want to be. I want to be somebody who is staunch in my beliefs, but also malleable enough to learn new things, take on new things, and realize the ride's not over till it's over. And that could be tomorrow, or that could be 40 years from now.
Of lifelong learning.
And failing. They go hand in hand.
Comes with it. It's two sides of the same coin, right?
Correct.
Zach Hanson, thanks so much for spending time with me today. And I'm going to do a follow-up. We're going to get together perhaps a little later because we're in surprisingly such close proximity.
Yep.
And get you in studio, and we'll do a follow-up on your book. And, you know, where is your life changing and zigging and zagging? It'd be great to catch back up with you.
Perfect. I look forward to it. And thanks for having me. This was a blast.
Thanks, Zach.